What is happening? NJ Gaming Dude here, and this is going to be a video about how Resident Evil 5 can't be remade as a part of this article made by IGN. Now, this was actually a video that was kind of inspired by what Mutahar made with his video on his channel, Some Ordinary Gamers, and so I kind of just wanted to throw my hat into the ring as well regarding not only the fact that this article just doesn't really add out it people should not take this article seriously, but at the same time the idea that, hey, look, the game was made. If it's going to be remade, you might as well remake it. If you're not going to remake it, then maybe do something like Code Veronica or something. But eventually, at some point, if you're going to keep remaking Resident Evil games, you are going to eventually have to do 5 and or maybe 6, because effectively what happened with 5 was one of the highest selling Capcom games of all time, and that was due to, in no small part, because of Resident Evil 4's massive success. Now, what ended up happening though was because it came out in the late 2000s, it was very much where the PS3 360 generation, everything was grey, everything was modern military shooter. Effectively, you'd have your Call of Duties, you'd have your Battlefields, you would have your Gears of Wars and things like that, and it would all just be, everyone would hide behind cover and then shoot from cover and things like that. And so Resident Evil 5 kind of took that similar approach to just making it more of a third-person, over-the-shoulder action shooter, moving away from the horror element, because Resident Evil 4 did move a little bit away from the horror element. Because in Resident Evil 2 you had Mr. X, you had Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Resident Evil 1 as well. You kind of had a lot of really good stuff there. You also had Resident Evil 0, and all 4 of these games, 0, 1, 2, and 3, were all sort of isometric view, fixed camera angle PS1 horror games from back in the day, similar to stuff like Parasite Eve or the original Silent Hill. It was only from Resident Evil 4 onwards that we did get, sort of over-the-shoulder camera views. It still kept the limited inventory system, though in this case you kind of had to pack your own luggage instead of relying on limited space. So your limited space was almost even more limited in a way. But also Resident Evil 4 did lean into more of the campy side. However, due to the popularity of modern shooters, effectively, that's what ended up causing Capcom to make Resident Evil 5. It was based in Africa, where they were getting hit by a plague, and also Wesker was had taken control of a different corporation similar to Umbrella that is also kind of dealing viruses to everyone else in between. And there is a lot to kind of take in regarding that. A bit of an insane story, but again, Wesker is kind of like the cockroach that just doesn't want to die, even though, Midget Napoleon didn't really. God damn, he was funny. That was like the campy part of Resident Evil 4, but I digress. So, what people immediately thought about when they saw Resident Evil 5's original teaser trailer back in the day was, hey, Chris Redfield is shooting, who is a bulky white guy, is shooting a bunch of black guys. Oh, he's in Africa. So apparently in Africa, there are people who are not white that are referred to as Africans. That's interesting. That's kind of what the general discourse was at the time, back in the day, that people thought Resident Evil 5 is going too much in the action direction, and also Resident Evil 5 is racist because it has black zombies. But that's kind of interesting that you say that when becoming a zombie doesn't necessarily change your skin color. Maybe it just kind of turns your eyes red, maybe, I don't know, causes your skin to melt off in locations, and you lose your mind and want to eat other people because you see them as food instead. I guess it did have some elements in, there were a few elements in the trailers that were never actually in the end game, and it did actually also Also, the act structure in Resident Evil 5 was actually kind of confusingly laid out. No, actually, it was still a chapter structure. What I'm thinking of was Resident Evil 6's act structure. That was absolutely rubbish. Anyway, besides the point, so Resident Evil 5 was doing its thing, it sold way too many copies, and then Resident Evil 6 leaned even more into the action, even more so than before, and then by that point Resident Evil felt like a shadow of its former self, with two major misses in a row being Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. Then we also had games in between like Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. We also had the multiplayer Resident Evil game, which was Umbrella Corps, and then after that we then got what's it called? Resident Evil 7, which then brought back the horror in Resident Evil. With Resident Evil 7, all of its DLC, which then kind of ruined all the good that Resident Evil 7 had going for it. And then now we have Resident Evil 8. So it's kind of interesting to kind of like look back at the history of it. Oh yeah, that's right. How can I ever forget probably the most important clip of Chris Redfield in Resident Evil 5, which was him punching a boulder. You know, like, never forget sometimes some of the things. But yeah, I suppose this was one of the things I was wanting to kind of take note of, was like, here it says Resident Evil 5's depiction of Africa as the Dark Continent is harmful. Like, I don't... Yeah. Oh, hold on, here we go. So I'm gonna read this little paragraph here just to kind of really sell just how little of this article is even worth considering listening to or looking at in any way, shape, or form. Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material. That was a whole sentence. Yep. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, is a recognizably an updated version of the classic RPG, but its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart from the 1997 original. And so you could argue that Resident Evil 5 is actually the Resident Evil most in need of a remake. A whole new environmental structure, scenario design that reins in the action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes. But all of that doesn't account for Resident Evil's most notorious problem, racism, which was never, racism was never the problem with the game. The game was just way too action oriented and was more of a modern day military shooter than an actual horror game, and that also bled into Resident Evil 6. Keeping in mind Capcom is a Japanese company, so if they were to not have the game be in Africa, that would completely defeat the purpose of remaking the game completely, because you're changing too much. You're removing the essence of what made the game itself. So ultimately, in the end, if you're gonna remake 5, don't shy away from the things that you have done in the past. Maybe just kind of lean in more to make it more of a horror game and less of an action game. That's probably my only real thing that I want from it. Otherwise, there could be some really interesting ideas, like what Far Cry 2 did with you had some sort of like disease when you immediately arrive that you contract, and in order to survive you need to keep constantly taking medicine, and it was much more of a survival game before Far Cry 3 came along and completely, shifted the entire open world formula, as well as everything Ubisoft did, to be the exact same thing thereafter. But I digress. Let me know what you guys think about all of this stuff that I mentioned about Resident Evil 5, its possibility of having a remake or being remade, the content of the remake, and also just the contents of this article, because I feel like more often than not, when you talk about an IGN article, people are going to say you can't spell ignorant without IGN, which is just something that I've seen for like the past 10 years. So maybe hopefully people might have some more new material since like 10 years ago. Though with all of that said and done, like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 200 subs by the end of the year, and with all that said and done, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.